one of the goals, here is that you're always stretching your kids a bit. So there is going to be things they might grumble about, things they don't like, but they know that you love them and that these are for their good. And you're appreciative of how much they're doing and growing and learning. And so you're there to be encouraging them. So I think these do all fit together, but the bond always is the deepest and the bond is the most primary.
Before we get started, if you enjoy these episodes, you might want to check out more at optimwork.com. Our website offers unique content, tools, and exercises to help you thrive at work and beyond. We have an in-depth masterclass covering our entire theory of growth, daily recommendations for personalized advice, and a platform to help groups and organizations learn and practice optimal work together. You can get a free trial at optimwork.com. Now let's start the episode. Hey, this is Sharif here with another episode of the Optimal Work Podcast, joined by Dr. Kevin Majeres. Kevin, good to be here with you again.
Hey, Sharif, it's great to be back with you. Thanks for that.
Yeah, Kevin, I'm excited to do episode 5, if I'm not mistaken, in our Optimal Parenting series. So we've covered now the 3 qualities of parenting. What are they again? Connection, confidence, and consistency. And then we wanted to do a follow-up episode on consistency, right? Because it's pretty rich. And we had mentioned at the end of the last episode, talking more about discipline and how that fits into consistency.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that's one of the biggest challenges that people have when it comes to parenting is knowing how to discipline. There's a lot of conflicting advice, and there's a general tendency to have no discipline whatsoever. So it's just laxity. So that's what we're talking about, the extremes, when it comes to consistency. You can be rigid, but much more likely you can be lax. And in that case, you really have no expectations for children. You're not really helping them to grow. And then the family doesn't have these consistent routines that help them to thrive. Children need regular rhythms in their life in order to thrive. And the more regular these rhythms are, the fewer struggles there are. So a regular rhythm is like willpower. I mean, this is one of the reasons I don't like the idea of willpower, because it feels like you're having to force it all the time. But really willpower is just regularity. And so your whole brain knows what to expect next and it makes it easy to do it. So I think jumping in bed in the morning, well, once your brain totally expects you to do that, in fact, it just feels effortless. But when it has the expectation you're going to snooze, well, fighting that expectation, that's what makes it tough and seems to require willpower. But really, consistency is more important. And I think it's the same with parenting, that the more you have these regular practices built into the life of the family, the better, and the fewer struggles there will be. But I think it's never too late to start. And so so you can start at any moment to intentionally build better routines. And that then does require building better ways of disciplining if things go wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was recently reading this small primer on teaching called Tried and True, which was put out by Hillsdale, which is really great. And one of the points the author makes about teaching is the importance of, which I suppose is similar in many ways to parenting, having consistent expectations for your class so that they know what to expect every class, what kind of they're expected to, how they're expected to participate, their behavior, all these different elements. So it seems like it's very similar, the need to establish consistent expectations whenever you're trying to lead someone to higher ideals, better behavior, knowledge, that sort of thing, something they don't have yet.
That's right. In the classroom setting, as also points out there, it is just part of professionalism. So having a business-like approach. And how you manage the classroom shows that. And I think when it comes to parenting, that goes a long way and in doing the same. So the book that I like most on this topic is 1, 2, 3 Magic by Thomas Phelan. And after I mentioned it in I think it was a podcast somewhere, someone said that they were so happy I mentioned it because they tell everyone they know about it. Now, the book has been out for a while, but it's just a good common sense approach. It's not necessarily breaking new ground, but what does common sense look like when it comes particularly to, he talks about Phelan talks about the 3 tasks of parenting. which go perfectly with what we've been saying. And so the first task is the bond, to build the bond with the child, and that's connection. He actually doesn't put them in this order. But then the second task is encouraging good behavior. And that's these expectations that we were talking about with confidence. Shaping your expectations, helping see what are the skills that the child needs to build in order to thrive on this kind of challenge. And then the last is stopping bad behavior. In some ways, these last two domains are really where consistency comes in. And so the name of the book, 1, 2, 3 Magic, comes from his system for stopping bad behavior, which we can talk about. But before maybe getting into it, what I really loved about it is he identifies the dynamic in parenting of a downward negative spiral, where you begin by talking to the child and then trying to persuade the child and then arguing with the child and then yelling at the child and then hitting the child. So, and I think that kind of a downward spiral is precisely what we're trying to undo. And so there's an important preface is one of the goals of consistent discipline is that it can be done in a businesslike way, without emotion, and most importantly, without talking. At least not without a lot of talking.
And now when you say without emotion, I suppose you mean kind of without the like visible frustration or anger, as opposed to, when you were talking about connection, you talk about conveying warmth and so forth, so just to distinguish those, right?
Yep. So you have kind of two different modes. You have the warm mode, and particularly it's important when it comes to encouraging good behavior that you notice what kids are doing well. You catch them doing good things, and somehow in one little act of attending to it and being warm, responsive to it, you don't even have to say anything. And you just look for ways of planting, those interactions where you're just pleased with them and you're pleased with how well they did something. So you want to be multiplying those good interactions because that will make, when you have to deal with negative things, it'll make it more effective. So it's like you have to kind of get some money in the bank. And of course, every parent does because they've given so much to their kids. But if you look honestly at your interactions with your children and you see that the tone 9 times out of 10 is negative, that's a problem. Because it means that somehow they're not getting internally motivated. Right? So they're not making the skills, the ideals, their own. So you're having to continually supply motivation from the outside. I think that optimal parenting is all about helping to instill your ideals and values into your children so that they can take free action in being able to then to live according to that. So that's kind of the end goal is you want like eventually a well-formed adult, who has high ideals and can bring those ideals into their actions in definite ways. So when we talk about discipline then, the idea is you want to be able to be generally warm, generally noticing good things, not only noticing bad things. There's a big mistake, he says, the parents make, which is that they're much more expressive when they're displeased. And then when they're pleased, they just move on. And that's what you're trying to, it's normal to be like that. But that's what we're trying to undo. Be more pleased and not to be sappy and not to be overly expressive with words. But the kids will notice that you noticed and were pleased. And you try to internally in a very subtle way, try to do that. But sometimes they also do need very definite praise. They played a game really well together. They did something really well. They got their homework done without being reminded. I mean, it's great every once in a while that you would really let them know how much you appreciate that.
Yeah. Some kind of celebration.
Yeah.
So, well, Kevin, you mentioned briefly, the central method, the 1, 2, 3 Magic and where it gets its name. So maybe we should now dive into that.
Yes. And here, the most important thing is not what I'll say, it's what I'm not saying. So if a child is misbehaving, say they're yelling at a sibling, or there's something that you definitely think has to stop, they're throwing food, whatever. The first thing you say is, that's one. And you wait for 5 seconds. So it's what comes after that's one that matters the most. that the mistake, he says, that is the most common is that parents will keep talking. That's one. That's, you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be throwing the food around. You shouldn't be hitting your sister. You shouldn't be. So he says that actually interferes because, and this is totally true from just a neuroscience perspective, that if a child is activated, they're not really able to process language that well. When dynorphins are high, dopamine is low, cortical activity is shut down a bit. So saying that's one, and then being silent after, gives them time to they kind of tune into reality again. Like, okay, what was I doing? What am I doing? And it gives them a chance to take responsibility and change course on their own. If they then change course, you can be pleased. So this addresses the issue, just to say real quick. Do you always have to first do the connection step when you're trying to discipline? No, you don't. The underlying matrix of connection needs to be there. But if it's a matter of stopping something right now that should be stopped, then you need a system for doing it. And the best I've seen is the counting. But this may not work for all kids. But if it can work, ages 2 to 12 is what he says is best for, then it's great to try it. But let's say then the kid keeps doing the bad thing and 5 seconds have passed and they didn't catch themselves and stop. Then they get, that's 2. And again, silence. And 5 seconds goes by and they haven't stopped. Then they get a, that's 3. And the consequence comes. Once you say that's 3, again, there doesn't have to be talking for a little while. They need to understand what they did. And then it's time to go. And then you have some place where they go for a timeout. It doesn't have to be a timeout. It could be that there's some kind of privilege that's lost. So it could be parents will understand best what would speak to their children. And it's best that this, in some way, is explained in advance. Look, if you're doing this again, I'm going to start counting. After I say a number, I'm going to wait and I'm going to give you time to figure out what it's for. I'm not going to tell you. I'm sure you can figure it out. And then if we get to 3, here's the consequence that's going to happen. So the kid understands the consequence. The reason for the timeout is, one, there's a lot of great data on timeouts. So much so that basically all the professional associations that are in this space, like the American Academy of Pediatrics, are all in favor of timeouts. So worldwide timeouts, there's good data that they work. The normal rule for a timeout is 1 minute per year of life. Now I can't imagine doing it with a 1-year-old. So, but once they're 2. And generally, I know the Academy of Pediatrics says it shouldn't be longer than 5 minutes. I'm not sure about that. I don't know. Maybe for older kids, it actually can be for longer. And Phelan doesn't put on any upper limit that I can remember. But the idea of the timeout is it gives them time probably to calm down and to reflect. And while they're on the timeout, you don't explain to them what they did wrong. So the time may eventually come to explain things. But really, 9 times out of 10 is pretty obvious that he knows not to throw food, or he knows not to, I'm picking on the boys here, but but the child knows not to do something. So I think that he says that the magic of this is, paraphrasing, is that you will be able to deal with misbehavior in a consistent and calm way, and your children will respond and take responsibility for their actions. So what eventually happens, he says, normally you never even have to get to 3 as a rule. But sometimes you will, especially in the first week of starting to do this. And then usually you don't have to do it much after that. The end result of learning how to apply discipline is that you enjoy your kids. Well-raised kids, who there's appropriate discipline, can be a complete joy to be with. So kids are like gardens, and when weeds grow, and they have to be pruned from time to time. You have to encourage the good growth. So that's kind of what this approach to parenting is like. It's a lot like gardening. So it needs attention. That's the light of the sun shining. That's the affection. And it does require some pruning back of the weeds and encouraging the good growth, to come out.
Before we continue, a brief message. If you're benefiting from these discussions, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe. Doing so helps us to reach more people. So you're not just learning, you're also helping others to discover a path of growth and flourishing. Thanks for your support. Kevin, is this approach something that can be done like in public, like in church, for instance, if you're trying to keep the kids quiet? Would you still?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it can be done anytime, even though the consequence may come later. Ordinarily, you'd want the consequence to come right away. You'd have to be careful, though, in church, where if you get to 3 and they know the consequence is coming, then like all hell breaks loose. So you don't want to.
Yeah.
So you do. I think parents will just need to make their best judgment on.
Yeah. Great.
On what to do.
You mentioned earlier in that there's this downward spiral, which is very relatable to me. It seems like it happens when the parent or teacher or whatever gets too focused on the outcome, and then they're getting frustrated, and then the kid is getting frustrated, and then it's like this vicious cycle of increasing frustration on both sides. So the kid can't shape up, and the teacher is just getting worse and worse. How can you explain how exactly like this approach cuts through that?
Yeah, I think it does it primarily because you're thinking of that talk, persuade, argue, yell. How do you do those without words? They require words. Now, hitting is the last one that, of course, doesn't require words, but you're not going to jump right to hitting. So it seems to me that one of the common things there is that people are both using words to try to control the other. But if a parent or teacher lets themselves get emotionally activated, the child is now in control. So the goal of this is actually keep the parent completely in control. And the first way the parent does that is by not talking after saying, that's one. That's like the fundamental basis of this method, is to control yourself enough to not speak for another 5 seconds. Which is hard to do, particularly because you're annoyed. But that after you say that's one, it also gives you a moment to calm down and to be just kind of ticking the clock, watching it. And then you come with that's two if it's still going on. So the benefit is that the child is having multiple opportunities to rethink what they're doing. So, and they can do it. They usually know what they're doing wrong. Even, I don't know, this probably hasn't been tested with dogs, but dogs are the smartest social animal after humans. And my guess is something like this would work on them too. So that they, we tend to know what we're doing wrong. And I think this helps.
Well, Kevin, so I'm, as a programmer or software engineer, I'm always thinking of special cases and edge cases. So I want to get your thoughts before we move on to the rest of Phelan's framework and how it relates to our own. Just two like special cases here. So one is, what if you're dealing with multiple kids and maybe only one of them is misbehaving? So, you're teaching a class and then one kid is talking and okay, that's one. Then do you go on teaching the class? And then if that student talks again, okay, that's two. Or do you just have to pause everything until?
Yeah, and for instance, teachers could, they could write the name on the board and then they get a 1 after them and then just go back to teaching.
Okay. So it's okay.
So you don't want to, well, you're trying, again, if there's visible frustration and emotion, the child has won. The child has wrestled control. So what you want to do is there's some simple dispassionate notation, some acknowledgement, but then you add no fuel to the fire. So all attention is reinforcing. So the goal is to make sure that you are deliberately attending to all the right things. And so that as the children are doing what they should, and you enjoy being with them. So, and it is a great joy for children to know that their parents enjoy being with them, that their parents prefer being with them than doing other things. But if the children, if there's all these weeds, all these bad behaviors, and the children are always, whining and screaming, well, it's going to be really hard for parents to enjoy. And that is what Phelan said is the most remarkable and moving experience he's had teaching these things for 25 years, or however long when the second edition was out, is that parents write in saying how much they now love being with their kids. So anyway, so when it comes to the kids, I think what you want to do is make sure that your attention and approval is being communicated a lot. And then when there's disapproval, there's not a lot of attention given to it, because attention is like the sunlight that's shining. And again, they say there's no such thing as negative attention. And so you don't want to be reacting, giving, and fueling bad behavior by letting it push a button.
I see. Great. And then, okay, well, the second question, which is so if they come back, 20 minutes later and do the same thing, do you start over? That's one again?
Yep, there could be another. Yep. Now, it might be that you tell them that if this happens again, that there's some escalation too.
Right.
So that, and of course, I encourage people to read 1, 2, 3 Magic to get the full, because he goes through lots and lots of cases. So you can kind of get a sense for, how does the author say is the best way to apply it.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Kevin, maybe now we could move on to the second element, which is encouraging positive behavior, which, as you noted, kind of fits in with this idea of confidence as well as consistency.
Yeah. And this is where confidence sets the stage for consistency. So that if, with confidence, what you're trying to do is you have these expectations that your children can learn to manage challenges. And skills are the abilities they learn by managing challenges. So you're always thinking in terms of skills that they could be building. But that knowledge that they can, and the confidence you have that they can be building these skills will give you the ability to then be consistent and to think, how can I start building these then more into? And so there are a few areas that we've been talking about. So, it can be consistent with sleep and food and screens. Those are incredibly important. Being consistent with homework and getting ready in the morning. Again, really important. And it's good for you to be thinking of having these healthy routines that establish a kind of rhythm. That already can take care of most causes of fights. Because the more the child and your child's default attention knows what to expect and knows what's expected of them, the less friction there is internally for them to do it. But a surprise expectation will have high friction. So you should always be thinking, if there is a lot of friction going on, is that, were the expectations not clear going in? And that may very well be the case. So it might just be that the parents have to discuss among themselves, what are the kind of consistent things they want to be setting? Don't overdo it. Just get some in gradually and build them up bit by bit.
Mm-hmm. And my sense is having things written, it can be very helpful for kids. It's like it's set in stone. So having like the chores up on the fridge or house rules or something like that.
Yeah. And chores are a perfect example of a good behavior you're trying to encourage. So you assign it to them, but you don't want it to simply be a rule. You want them to be kind of proactive in living and doing the chore well, that they have a domain of responsibility. So this is important for them to be reliable, to be responsible. And this is kind of what our family values, for instance. So you tie the doing of the chore to kind of the kind of people we want to be, so that they see that there's an importance here beyond just getting the trash out the door. So it's not that you're fixated on the outcome. You could organize chores so that the house is always immaculate. But the focus on that particular outcome could come at a very, very high cost. And it might mean that the children never internalize kind of why are we doing these things? So why is it important? But the more it's put in terms of being thoughtful, of being reliable, of being caring for the others, and being generous, being loving, well, the better. The more it's put in terms of ideals and are linked to ideals, aged appropriately, the more the better. And so doing chores then is really important, and that parents are consistently enforcing the chores is important. But I think what you said about writing it down, definitely. You need clear expectations for when the chore is done by. And Phelan, when he's talking about chores, he says that, I remember one of the main things was to avoid the chore voice. So parents can have a particular tone of voice when they're talking about chores that can be kind of grating or whining, but it's a little bit of an irritating tone of voice, which makes sense because you kind of want to get the kid moving and make sure they're doing things. And oftentimes they'll say things like, isn't it time for us to clean our room? And he's like, well, one, be careful when you're saying that of the tone of voice. It should be businesslike. It should be kind of professional. 2, never pose it as a question. You give a clear expectation. So I'd like your room cleaned before dinner at 6. Okay, so that's a clear expectation. And never use we. So they're the ones with this responsibility, and this is kind of a domain that you're giving to them. And then when they do really well with it, you're quick to notice it and to appreciate it.
So with these kind of concrete behavior, how do you, if a child isn't living up to them, and maybe this happens more, when the kid gets a little older, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, in kind of a consistent way, and it's maybe something more, difficult, like, focusing while doing homework, or something more of a complex, say, study behavior or social behavior. How do you be patient with them, recognizing that, okay, it's difficult for them and they need to develop the habit, but they're actually not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So it doesn't seem like discipline is necessarily the right thing, but you want to be encouraging progress, and not necessarily focus too much on outcomes, like the growth mindset approach. So how do you think about that?
Yeah. So in the like, one just quick thing is there are 2 main approaches that he relies on when it comes to encouraging good behaviors. And what do you do when they're just not happening? So that you have a 16-year-old that just won't do the homework, and you know that they're not doing it. One system is what he calls the docking system. And that's, let's say that there is some kind of, I don't know if every family would like this. I don't think my parents would have done this. But it just means that if a child fails to do something, well, homework's not a good example. Let's say taking out the trash. And the expectation is that the trash is always removed, once the dinner is all cleaned up, the post-dinner cleanup. Well, if they don't do it, then the parent will offer to do it, but they dock them a certain number of, say, dollars from their allowance. Or, and so it's like the parent is getting paid to do it. Like, okay, but you can, the price will be $5 from your allowance. I'm happy to do that. The advantage of the docking system is it does allow that everything can be done calmly and consistently. So there's no emotion, there's no over talking or over explaining. The other great thing is it sets up the second way they learn. Besides the docking system, there's natural consequences. And being docked is a little bit of a natural consequence. He thinks that in general, it's better to let natural consequences teach children if possible. And in this, he's a little bit like the sovereign child, who only relies on natural consequences. And so natural consequence would be that if a child wants to play outside and won't put on the coat, that they get cold. So you have to be okay with that. You have to decide that it's actually safe for the child to do. But if it is safe, it's just uncomfortable, great. That's a natural consequence they can learn from. Let's say the homework isn't being done. Well, what you don't want to do is have a system where you are always injecting effort into your child doing homework, and that every night is injecting effort. So it might be that you have to let go, tell them in advance you're doing this, and let natural consequences. Okay, but then the teacher is the one that they're having to kind of explain to, and then maybe that will help them to change. So those are two ways of doing it. But if it's something deeper, there could be there might be problems where in fact you need to be going deeper into connecting and then confidence in order to be able to have consistency. And so if the child who normally had been a good student suddenly stops doing schoolwork, well, that might mean you have to do a lot of work of bonding and being very patient and understanding to see if they'll open up about what really is the issue here. Maybe they're being bullied at school. Maybe there's something that happened on social media. Maybe there's some pain that they might need you to help bond with them in the midst of. There might be something that they have a hard time accepting that only the bond with you will help them to be able to get past this. So there could be a blockage that's causing this. So I think, if you over rely on discipline methods, then you miss these opportunities to bond in the midst of the real challenges your children are facing. But not every challenge is that level. And so sometimes there's simple things that can be dealt with in simpler ways.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Well, Kevin, I think we're basically out of time. And, the third element that Phelan discusses, building the bond, I think we discussed a lot in the episode on connection. But so I don't know if there's any note you want to end on here, maybe related to tying that in, or any final thoughts you have.
So it's interesting that connection, of course, I think is the deepest of these. But connection itself needs a kind of consistency. If you don't have consistent times to be with your kids one-on-one, if you don't have consistent times you're doing enjoyable things together, consistency is like the matrix there that everything else is built into. So you can see that they all help each other. The stronger your connection with the child, the easier consistency will be. And then the easier confidence will be. The stronger your confidence then the more you can have consistent practices that really do stretch them a little bit. One of the goals, here is that you're always stretching your kids a bit. So there's going to be things they might grumble about, things they don't like, but they know that you love them and that these are for their good. And you're appreciative of how much they're doing and growing and learning. And so you're there to be encouraging them. So I think these do all fit together. But the bond always is the deepest and the bond is the most primary.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Well, Kevin, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharif. Yeah.
And I should note that we've gotten a lot of great questions over the past couple of weeks on this topic as we've been doing the series. And so we're planning one final episode Q&A for next week.
Yeah, and there's still time to send questions to team, TEAM, @optimumwork.com.
Yes. Wonderful. All right. Well, we'll be back next week.
Till next time.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoyed our conversation and you're looking for more in-depth guidance, check out optimumwork.com, our unique platform that delivers content, tools, and exercises to help you thrive at work and beyond.